Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, of course, we have more trouble brewing in the Middle East. Russia and Turkey is back in the news, but we also have problems of our own right here in the United States of America. We're going to start off, though, with one of NATO's key members. Turkey is considering cooperation with Russia, who is not a NATO member, as relations with Turkey and NATO has been on the downward spiral. The Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said, "It seems to us that NATO members behave in an invasive fashion on issues such as exchange in technology and joint investments. If Russia was to treat this with interest, we are ready to consider the possibility of cooperation in this sector."
Other nations are increasing their cooperation with Syria. China is seeking closer military ties with Syria. Now, according to military officials, the Chinese military is willing to provide aid and training assistance to the Syrian government. Now, this is a different stance from the standoffish stance that China has taken in the past regarding the war in Syria. Chinese news agencies reported that while visiting Damascus, Chinese military officials also met with a Russian general.
Interesting. As a result, you see a potential alliance forming with both China and Iran. Well, this past week, Russian jets launched airstrikes against ISIL from an Iranian base. The Russian military said that the strikes have eliminated 5 weapons depot and training compounds in the area. So there's a strategic cooperation between Russia, Iran, and Syria. And of course, now China is going to be added to that alliance.
Well, the difference between this alliance and the American-led one is to target terrorists. Russia, Iran, and China are supporting the Syrian army, while the U.S.-led coalition is supporting rebel-led forces in Syria. Now, the problem is that sometimes those rebel forces, they join with the terrorists, so it becomes real hard to distinguish between the rebel forces from what they call the terrorist forces.
Right. So I guess best, Jeff, if all of this goes through, you'll have U.S.-led forces, the coalition led by the United States, accompanied by the U.K., France, of course, Saudi Arabia, among others, supporting the rebels in Syria. But on the other hand, you'll have Russia, Iran, China, and possibly Turkey supporting the Assad government, all in an attempt to combat terrorism. So it seems like both coalitions that are working to combat terrorism are actually combating one another.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, German Chancellor Angela Merkel says that there's no need to lift the EU sanctions on Russia and that they should remain in place because Moscow hasn't lived up to all of its agreements under the Minsk peace plan. She claimed that Russia has created a major crisis of Black Sea Peninsula of Crimea to join the territory in 2014. She also criticized Russia's backing of pro-Russia forces in eastern Ukraine.
The Minsk agreements call for a ceasefire along with a range of measures to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine. In June, the EU extended energy, financial, and defense sanctions on Russia over the Ukraine crisis until the end of January next year.
Well, Jordan has once again condemned Israel for allowing settlers to visit Al-Aqsa Mosque. Jordan's Minister of Islamic Affairs warned that pursuing such a policy can spark religious war in the region. He also denounced Israeli police for arresting and beating worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest site in the world of Muslims. Jordan's King Abdullah has also condemned Israeli troops and settlers for their blatant attempts to change the status quo in Jerusalem, Al-Quds.
Interesting. Well, back to the United States. A curfew has gone into effect in Milwaukee at 10 p.m. in hopes of heading off another day of violent protest in the area. Riots erupted after a black suspect was fatally shot by a black police officer. After days of the citizens of Milwaukee trying to find calm in all the chaos, Milwaukee's mayor had a message for the protesters. Do not do further damage to this great neighborhood.
The shooting death on Saturday of suspect Seville Smith triggered protests that ended with torched-out businesses and cars. There were dozens of arrests, and police in riot gear quickly found themselves in the path of bottles, flying rocks, and even bullets. Now, police investigators said that the suspect had a weapon with 23 rounds when he ran off after being pulled over by police for having a suspicious vehicle. Now, when asked to drop his weapon, police said he refused and was subsequently shot twice, once in the chest and the other in the arm.
Well, a little farther southeast of Chicago, the gun violence epidemic has been getting worse, not better. So far this year, there have been 2,136 shootings. That's a 48% increase over the same time period last year. The latest victim, Arshel Dennis, he was the son of a police officer. Just last year, Dennis spoke about growing up in Chicago, and he said, "It's kind of bad being a youth there, but it teaches you a lot of stuff."
The 19-year-old son of a Chicago police officer was shot to death as he sat on the front steps of his mother's home with a friend. Now, Chicago's police chief said that it's just sad because here you have a man that was raising his son to be a man, doing what he was supposed to be doing, who simply came home to visit his mother, and then this happens to him.
Well, after followers of Islamic State slashed the throat of a priest at a Catholic church, French President Hollande said France is at war. He also said in a press conference, "We are facing Islamic State, which has declared war, and we must fight this war using all means. I owe you also this truth," he continued. "This war will be long." Well, both terrorists were killed shortly after running out of the church, and details about one of the attackers began to quickly emerge.
The attacker apparently was on France's watch list and even wore an electronic surveillance tag.
Wow.
But some say that there's information that's very hard to see to determine which threats are real and which are not real. And to be honest, Katan, analysts say that we have to expect more of these kind of attacks, even if they are on these watch lists and wear these kind of electronic monitoring devices. They expect more attacks.
Sure. So watching them is not solving the problem of dealing with these terrorist attacks. Well, as we've been reporting on the increase of terrorist attacks throughout the world, take a look at this next video as it shows how these attacks have been on the rise since the war on terror slipped into a new gear.
Well, you can see the numbers really increasing, and even the last years aren't in there yet, but I'm sure it's going to overshadow those previous years.
Yeah.
Well, in Turkey, a massive forest fire has broken out near NATO's military base in the Izmir province. Now, reports suggest that the base holds U.S.-owned nuclear weapons. Not a great combination, fire and weapons.
No. Get away. A new report reveals that more than $1 billion worth of weapons have been flowing from Europe to Middle Eastern countries that are known to ship arms to Syria. The Balkan Investigative Reporting Network and the Organized Crime and Reporting Project did the investigation that uncovered these latest findings. Since the start of the Syrian conflict, it has revealed that more than $1 billion worth of weapons have been exported to Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates, and also Turkey.
Now, the report examined arms export data, UN reports, lane tracking, and weapons contracts.
That's a lot of weaponry. Well, notions of suspicion coming from Turkey regarding the coup, and some suspicion as to who was actually behind this latest coup that took place in Turkey just recently, as we brought it to you here on YPN News. Let's turn over to our correspondent, Larry McGee. Larry, what do you have for us?
Recent air assaults by France in the U.S. are reported to have consumed the lives of more than 100 civilians, according to a letter recently dispatched to the UN from the Syrian Foreign Ministry. The document stated that the French unjust aggression claimed the lives of more than 120 civilians, most of them children, women, and the elderly. The fate of scores of other civilians still under debris, it said, is unknown. It was also cited that the French strikes targeted the exact same area that was struck by the U.S. just days prior, and in that attack, 26 civilians were reportedly killed. Damascus is said to have sent a total of 2 letters in all, condemning the actions carried out by French and U.S. warplanes as bloody massacres, which rained their missiles and bombs on civilians instead of terrorists. Global watchdog Amnesty International is reported to have investigated dozens of Confederate or coalition airstrikes and discovered that in most instances where non-combatant deaths were credibly reported, the Allies disregarded those claims. The U.S.'s response, communicated by Special Presidential Envoy Brett McGurk, was that, "I think some of these things could be particularly exaggerated or inflated, but I don't have any knowledge firsthand to discuss what may have happened or didn't happen," he said. DOD, or the Department of Defense, is having a look at this right now, he said, and I just have nothing else to say about it. Analysts, however, are reluctant to believe that the U.S. would not be aware of its own airstrikes and what the objectives were. The Western forces Western forces have little value for human life is actually not a new claim. The West has come under fire previously for what is being called its cold calculations that regard the termination of scores of civilian lives as an acceptable means to a military end. Far from being a matter of controversy, the State Department has actually acknowledged a formula for determining the maximum number of allowable civilian deaths when executing air assaults on important targets. Analysts are quick to point out the moral contrast between that sort of an approach and the barrage of heavy-handed criticism leveled at Russia for the civilian casualties attributed to its strikes. The ancient Mesopotamian nation of Turkey is struck by what it believes to be betrayal on behalf of the U.S. related to the recent failed coup attempt in that country. A Turkish prosecutor has alleged that both the CIA and FBI were involved in training the insurrectionists, who were allegedly followers of Fethullah Gulen, who is believed to have masterminded the coup. According to the statement released by the chief prosecutor's office, the CIA and FBI provided training to the plotters who attended centers linked to the Gulen movement. The failed coup attempt aimed to weaken the state by getting rid of the government, the statement said, and it went on to say that those in the Gulen movement who work in the judicial and security institutions and who receive training tried to put this task into action. Following the failed attempt by thousands of suspected conspirators, thousands of suspected conspirators have been arrested. America has been suspiciously critical, and the Turkish government says the U.S. should be ashamed for its responses. Turkish citizens are now burning American flags in protest to the U.S.'s presence there. There is currently 2,000 American soldiers stationed in the nation, but more importantly, there is reported to be dozens of U.S. nukes housed there. Though Turkey has long been regarded as a U.S. ally, tensions have been mounting between the two nations, and the intrigue involved in the recent coup attempt has added yet another heavy layer of complexity to that relationship. The U.S. has 50 of its nuclear warheads housed in the Euphrates nation at the Interlet Air Base, and this amid claims by analysts that there is a clear risk of the relationship between the two nations reaching a crisis. Reports are that the head of Turkey is now attempting to distance himself from the U.S. and aware of how strategically dependent America is on the bases in Interlet. He is using that as leverage, they believe, to rally his followers and justify destroying his opposition. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, if those reports are proven and it is found that the U.S. was behind that coup, it's definitely not going to improve any relations between the United States and Turkey.
Not by far.
Well, in an exclusive interview with Press TV, Khalid al-Obadeh, the Iraqi defense minister, stressed Iranian support of Iraqi troops would continue as they fight to liberate the city of Mosul from Daesh terrorists.
The defense minister told Press TV for sure Iranian assistance is going to continue. There is military coordination and cooperation with Iran. He continued saying the Iranians played, quote, an honorable role in Iraq. Al-Abadeh added Iranian advisors are currently present in Iraq with permission of the government. He said the support from Iran's defense ministry has been ongoing and at very critical times.
Turkey, however, is not a welcome ally to the country, as the defense minister made clear, saying the presence of Turkish troops in Bashir obstructs the observations to liberate Nineveh. That is a fact. And when Mr. Prime Minister, and he was referring to the Iraqi Prime Minister, had warned of a war greater than the war on Daesh, he was basing his statement on information he had. If Turkish troops intervene, then the city of Mosul and the province of Nineveh will have become an arena for region conflicts, and this is what we predict. Therefore, I second Mr. Premier's opinion. So they're actually saying there's a war coming that's greater than what's fighting right now.
Oh, that's scary. While Iraqi officials have requested Turkey pull out of the region, it so far has not withdrawn its troops from the country's north. Ankara has deployed troops to the region last December, claiming their reason is to help train Iraqis to fight against Daesh. But Iraq's capital, Baghdad, says this is a violation of national sovereignty.
Well, it's been nicknamed the football, but the capabilities inside this rather large carry-on, if unleashed, would be devastating. Now, no matter where the president goes, a military aide is within a few feet handling the legendary bag. What's inside? The ability to launch nuclear weapons of mass destruction and more. According to the Arms Control Association, the U.S. currently has 1,481 nuclear warheads deployed on ballistic missiles and aircraft bases. The weapons are far more destructive than the ones used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In fact, some of them, Katan, up to 20 times more powerful.
Wow. Well, the football is carried by 5 military aides, one from each branch of the armed forces, who work in a rotation. One such aide was Marine Major Pete Metzger. He carried the nuclear football for President Reagan for 3 years. Metzger related the experience to CNN, saying, I wouldn't say I was on edge, but I was very, very focused on what I was going to do. I mean, the time is so short between alert and execution, he said. You have to be ready anytime for any move. And that's why one of us was always in very close proximity to the president.
Well, a second football is also carried by another aide for the vice president if something were to take place causing the commander-in-chief to become incapacitated. Metzger wouldn't discuss the contents of the briefcase except that there was communication equipment inside.
Well, a former director of the White House Military Office, Bill Dooley, however, described in his book that there are 4 crucial components inside the bag. The 4 components are as follows. 1, a black book listing strike options for retaliation if the U.S. is attacked with nuclear weapons. 2, another book listing bunker locations where the president can be taken in an emergency. 3, a manila folder listing procedures for emergency broadcast systems. And 4, a small card with authentication codes to verify it's the president ordering a nuclear launch.
To be given the responsibility of carrying the football, aides have to undergo rigorous background checks, including extensive psychiatric screening by the Military Secret Service and FBI. Pete Metzger reflected on the power at the president's fingertips and the mindset he had when doing his job, saying, "The result of a decision the president would make is so grotesquely horrible, it would change the face of the earth. It would change humanity. It would change mankind.
Interesting. Metzger continued, and I guess when you're on duty, you try not to think about the impact of that, but you're fully prepared to do so if you have to.
Well, Kilifi County in Kenya is experiencing an extreme food shortage due to a prolonged drought. Now, the drought has caused crop failure across the central coastal region. The state is appealing for food aid for the area. However, the situation is being described as disastrous. Now, schools are even contemplating closure. While the entire Kilifi County is affected, the Ganzu and Margarini areas are bearing the greatest brunt of the food shortage.
Pictures of children scrambling for leftover seeds from wild fruit show the pangs of hunger these people are experiencing. Children are forced to suspend schooling in order to take up the full-time job of looking for wild fruits in the treacherous wilderness. Adults are combing through harsh thickets in search of food, but even the fruits are now fizzling out.
Children and women often suffer the worst in these situations, but everyone in the region is feeling the impact. Around 300,000 people are now facing a possible food crisis after prolonged drought and crop failure. So you see that drought that we've talked about and reported for quite a few, actually for years now, is still going on certain parts, and it's really affecting a lot of people.
People starting to really feel the pinch of the lack of rain, lack of water. Well, first for NASA's Hubble telescope. Pictures of two galaxies colliding 230 million light years away from Earth in the constellation Hercules. The extraordinary images were captured by the Wide Field Planetary Camera 2 aboard the ESA Hubble telescope.
At first glance, scientists thought it to be an abnormal shaped galaxy, but upon further study, they believe they are witnessing the live merging of two galaxies. It occurs when gravitational pull attracts the galaxies closer and closer until they collide with each other, and the process will give birth to a new child galaxy.
Interesting. Once formed, the new galaxy will not resemble either of the two parent galaxies. It will have its own unique features, size, and shape. NASA reports the major galaxy is named NGC 6052.
Well, in closing, and a lot closer to home, we would like to show you something captured by the International Space Station as it looked towards Earth. Now, the object has yet to be identified, but its golden color and square shape have many wondering what is hovering above the Earth. Take a look for yourself. Very interesting. We'll have to watch that and see what they come up with.
That's right.
Well, galaxies being born 230 million light years away and objects hovering above the Earth coming from who knows where makes you realize just how small Earth is compared to our ever-expanding universe. Well, ever wonder why all this was created and what it has to do with you? Well, contact the House of Yahweh today and request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter, and see for yourself why mankind was created and how the universe ties into their next assignment.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604, or you can call them at 1-800-613-9494. You can also visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yeshuahawkins.com, www.yahwehsbranch.com, or visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And of course, don't forget the latest and greatest study tool on the internet to the Holy Scriptures, the Yisrael Says program. And you can find that at www.yisraelsays.com.
Well, up next is the one who can give you the answers to your questions, Yeshua Hawkins. And the best thing is, you don't have to travel light years to get it.
Nice.
Well, from all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.